Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge, a podcast about people in the fintech space who are thinking through problems very clearly and are enjoying uncommon outcomes as a result of that. I'm Dr. Alice Elizabeth Wilson, founder and CEO of Uncommon, a specialist research and communication studio serving fintech clients. In each episode, I sit down with someone who I think is brilliant to steal their ideas, insights, and mental models for my own benefit, and now also for yours. Okay, so today we are joined by Bret Neuman of Arrived Homes and of many other interesting and varied places as well. I'm very happy that you're here with us today. Thank you for your time. I would love to start by handing over to you, Bret, to introduce yourself in the way that feels the most interesting and relevant as of today.
Great. Well, lovely to chat with you today, Alice. My name's Bret Neuman. Currently, I am the head of brand and content for Arrived. Arrived is a real estate platform that really seeks to democratize access to rental homes, vacation rentals, private credit, and make that as easy as ordering an item off of Amazon. So within about 4 minutes, you can log onto the site, link your bank account, and be investing in rental homes or other real estate assets, and have the opportunity to participate in what has typically been a very difficult market, especially for those that are just starting their investment journey, to be able to jump in and appreciate some of those long-term benefits that real estate has offered folks over the years, both from rental income to long-term appreciation of properties.
Awesome. And just to clarify for our listeners, Arrived offers fractionalized investing for retail level investors, right? Not for accredited investors and like RIAs and stuff like that.
Yeah, so Arrived is open to U.S. residents, accredited and non-accredited, and we really like at whatever level, from a minimum of $100 investment all the way up to, thousands and thousands of dollars. We offer that opportunity both for retail investors that are just starting their journey all the way through. We have a lot of folks that used to be traditional landlords that are deciding that they don't want to be dealing with fixing the toilets at 3:00 in the morning from a call from one of their residents. And we really just have folks of all kinds along that investor spectrum.
That's awesome. And to my mind and in my experience, this is something that really differentiates Arrived from many other fintech platforms. What I've encountered a lot in my own work is really cool and interesting fintechs who recognize the potential of tokenization. I think anyone who's working in the space agrees that alongside open banking, fractionalized investment through tokenizing on blockchain is going to be a defining trend in fintech and investment in the coming years. However, what I often find, and I wonder if this has been the case for you as well, is that a lot of fintechs start out really wanting to do this democratization piece and very quickly have to pivot for cash flow reasons, for cultural reasons, I'm not sure what, to catering to the same sort of demographics of people who are historically able to access the sort of benefits and diversification boons that can come with alternative assets. And they head over to institutional investors, accredited investors, less risky investors who have higher capital amounts to invest. And Arrived is one of the few platforms that I've seen that is really walking the talk on this accessibility piece, because $100 opens the door to like millions of people that even $1,000 entry point would not permit. So I think that's really commendable. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, for us, what's really important, we're a fractionalized real estate investing platform, but we're not using the blockchain or tokenization as a way to skirt traditional securities kind of enforcement. So we are offering real assets. Everything that we offer on the platform is SEC qualified and also very open and transparent with the way that we conduct all of our business and make that information available to our audience. For a lot of folks, this is their foot in the door to really experiencing those long-term benefits of real estate investing that have typically been much more accessible to folks that are more sophisticated or further on in their journey, whether that be accredited investors or just investors with access to a lot more capital. And while we do also cater to a lot of those, because the ease of use of the platform and the ability to really kind of diversify across a lot of different markets or amongst equity and debt, real estate backed debt, investments in a very easy, centralized platform is also appealing to some of those more traditional investors. For me, especially, I'm very passionate about opening up for that retail investor, that person that is like just learning about investing or real estate investing for the first time and just wanting to kind of like dip their toe in and experience some of these benefits that have, traditionally been a little bit more inaccessible to the average person.
Mm. I want to talk to you about how you think about and move forward with your content marketing strategy for Arrived. But before we talk about that part specifically, I really want to acknowledge and get you to talk a little bit about your lineage, because you started, as far as I can trace your professional ancestry, it kind of goes memes, dogs, tokenized real estate investing. And I want to know so much about that transformation.
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the big buckets in my unconventional journey over the years. Really, from the very early stages of my career, I was really utilizing social media and content marketing as a means to an end. I kind of started out as a theater programmer, special events, doing experiential kind of like food and film. And I worked for a theater chain out of Austin, Texas called the Alamo Drafthouse that's really well known for their kind of like experiential screenings. And so I was programming film festivals, special events, and really using social media or, content marketing as a means to get butts into seats for events that I was producing, which kind of transitioned me into like the early days of social media marketing being like an actual function of real businesses and not just something that everybody thought like, oh, my nephew's on social media, they can be the social media marketer for a company, which led me into working with a lot of influencers and a lot of folks on YouTube in early startup days when I first moved to Seattle, all the way through launching and building programs for companies like Rover, which is a marketplace platform for pet owners and service providers, to running the social team for a very traditional old school internet humor site, Cheeseburger. It has been a little bit of a whirlwind in terms of my career path, but the touch points have largely been the same. It's like, finding an audience, what it is that motivates them, what it is that they're interested in, and really producing content that resonates with them that is furthering the goals of the business. You back into the same goals whenever you're content marketing, whether that be memes or dogs or fractionalized real estate. There's a lot of the same touchstones there, and that's how I've approached it.
I think you've expressed that really well, and it gets to the crux of something that I find very fascinating about content marketing, because the way that you've summarized it there is very simple and very logically pure. We're looking for touch points to do with what are people interested in and how can we speak to them on that level. In practice, though, the implementation of that, executing on that strategy, has wildly different success rates and can feel overwhelming, unclear, difficult to do. And I think that fintech and investment sort of industry brands struggle with that more than some other industries do, because there's an expectation of like a level of seriousness, compliance considerations and so on, that can sort of, I think the industry is more risk averse with its messaging and prefers a more conventional, traditional type of tone and narrative. So I would love to hear you talk about how you've taken all of that quite pop cultural and like very energetic and quite young feeling types of content in your experience and how you're applying that right now at Arrived.
I think that's a real consideration. I mean, in the end, working for a fintech platform, you have less leeway to be glib or, like this is folks' livelihood and their money. So there has to be a very much like a bedrock of seriousness,
Yeah.
but that does not mean that you also have to be stodgy or unapproachable to like the average retail investor that might be coming into this industry for the first time and kind of learning, early on in their investment journey. But for me, the calculation always has to be, what am I doing that, because at any time I don't want to alienate either end of the spectrum, whether that
Yeah.
be like traditional, sophisticated, accredited investors who are utilizing the platform, or retail investors that are making their first $100 foray into investing for the first time. So there's very much like a calculation in my mind to make sure that I'm not necessarily like splitting the difference to where you get middling content that doesn't really
Yeah.
appeal to either side, but you're being mindful of the fact that you do have two very distinct audiences that you're trying to cater towards that may have different needs at any given time. But I think that there's some standard things that you could do that will appeal to the retail investors but not alienate the more sophisticated investors. An example of this would be like concentrating on accessibility. So not using acronyms, even if they are kind of like well understood acronyms for industry insiders, you're always kind of like spelling that out, but that's not a roadblock to a more sophisticated investor that belittles their intelligence or
Yeah.
kind of talks down to them at the expense, of their knowledge. So those are some of the calculations I make. We are a young startup and we
Yeah.
are a disruptor in the space. So adding a little kind of like exuberance, not so buttoned up, but still serious, is a good place to be in terms of the tone and voice that we're going for here.
Yeah. So drawing on those points that you've just made there about the balancing act between exuberance and giving the content the respect that it deserves, given that it is dealing with people's livelihoods and their money and everything, I'd love you to talk a little bit about what you think the biggest problems are, or the biggest challenges, perhaps more than problems, in creating and designing the content that will do that job very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those challenges are not limited solely to a fintech
Yeah.
platform. In content marketing in general, there's always going to be an element of there's a lot of things that I could be doing or arguably should be doing, and then I have limits in my resources, so I have to really ruthlessly prioritize what I'm working on today. And especially
Mm.
in brand and content marketing, some of the signal you get as to what is working and what's not working are a lot more difficult to measure than your typical
Yeah.
last touch attribution conversion metrics that maybe a growth marketer or a product focused marketer is more attuned to. So there's always going to be a balancing act of this is just like the bar of quality, or this is what good looks like in terms of respecting your audience and producing good content, but not also over revving on projects that may not actually like move the business forward, especially when you're working for a startup that really is focused on the short term, because if you don't,
Yeah.
you may not have 10 years to build up this legacy brand, and you're constantly having to balance those two truths at the same time. And then
Mm.
I'd also add to that, like specifically for fintech platform, aside from compliance is a big one. You want to
Yeah.
make sure that you're not getting yourself in trouble down the line with FINRA or some regulatory agencies at the very lowest bar of entry. But beyond that, it's like not overselling things or like using language that, even if it's not to the point of being against compliance, you're not leading folks down a path that's not setting expectations
Yeah.
and really helping people to understand all of the nuances that go with putting your money into any investment platform. And so I'm very mindful of that. I want to, even at the expense of some of the more flowery kind of marketing things that you might see other platforms or other companies kind of using, if anything, I'd rather err on the side of being very level setting folks so they have a good understanding of what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah. 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 I wonder if you would like to share what you think is one of the best things you've ever made and why in the content of content marketing.
Here at Arrived, I've been able to build a program that is really, I think, incorporating content holistically into a lot of areas of the
Mm.
business, whether that be on individual product pages to email marketing to some like the webinars that we're hosting, and we're producing video content and clipping and kind of sawdusting. One of the things that I've really made a staple of my career over the years is trying to make a lot from a little, or
Mm.
wring every little piece of value out of every content piece. We like to call it sawdusting, where you like record a webinar, but you can also clip it into a bunch of clips that can then be embeds on blog articles or FAQs, or you're really like looking for ways to use every piece of that content and leverage it so you can be relatively scrappy, but still get a high volume of useful pieces that you
Mm.
can kind of use to spice up all your content. And I think we've done a really good job at Arrive of incorporating that open and transparency
Mm,
and really like building a relationship with our investor community, but also really putting all these pieces in front of potential future investors that are just kind of learning about what it might take to buy their own vacation rental property or sell their home or have it become a rental property of their own, and showing them here's how you would go about the traditional way, but here's also some alternatives to that that we can provide in a way that's like building the knowledge but and not necessarily hard selling people, but is putting ourselves out there for people that might be in market for what we're offering.
yeah. On that note, I want you to talk about the Stranger Things project. I want you to talk about the Myers house. It's so cool.
Oh, we've got a lot to share on that. That project has turned out so cool, and I'm really excited to share some of the finished product as we kind of like get over that last hurdle of getting it qualified and getting it all ready for guests to list on Airbnb. That has been a really interesting project, and a lot of us view it as like a side business within our
Yeah,
main business. It's kind of like our side hustle, like that we do for fun. So the folks that are working on it here at the company are all like really huge fans of the show, obviously, and this opportunity came up that really seemed to be a perfect fit for a fractional platform like ourselves, because this will be a project that is fully owned by fans of the show who will also be able to stay there and also realize the benefits of all the rental income and long-term appreciation that comes from that property over the course of its life as a living monument to the show. So it's been a really fun project. Essentially what we've done is we've purchased the home that was used for all the exterior shots of the Byers family from the show Stranger Things, and we've gone in and just lovingly recreated this kind of like dripping with 80s nostalgia homage to the show. So you can listen to records in Jonathan's bedroom, and you could sit at a couch with a fully interactive Christmas light wall. And this will be like, I think, a prime destination for fans of the show to be able to stay for a weekend, go visit all the filming locations of the show in the kind of like greater Atlanta area. And it's really interesting because it will be, like I said, fully owned by the fans. And that's, I think, a unique thing that a platform like Arrived is able to offer. And so it's been a really fun project to work on.
yeah, super cool and involved, and is a night and day difference to investing in real estate as we would conventionally imagine it. So deeply experiential and so grounded in very relatable, highly meaningful cultural moments and experiences in people's real lives. I think it's a really unique offering. I wonder if Arrived has any intention to make this into like a subset of the type of properties it offers, like other properties from other cool types of films that people would be excited about investing in.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation that's happened over here. And this one particular property really fell in the sweet spot of being viable from
Yeah,
a unit economic standpoint, as ultimately in the end we wouldn't want to just have a kind of NFT of a property.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
ultimately we are very beholden to making decisions that will ultimately benefit the investors of that property. And so a lot of other properties don't really fall within that kind of
sure.
window to make sense, but I think there's a lot of room, especially on the vacation rental front, for more experiential properties, as that natural kind of progression between like travelers, and as they index between staying at a hotel or an Airbnb, you definitely see that those more highly differentiated properties, make a lot of sense for people versus I'm going to stay in a room at a privately owned Airbnb versus stay at a room at a hotel. That kind of decision making process is
Yeah.
a little bit more cut and dry.
Yeah, totally. Because being able to stay in a place, for example, like the buyer's house, then transforms the room from being a room with amenities that I hope to have on my holiday, like a bed and a bathroom, into a part of the whole holiday itself. Perhaps it even becomes the whole holiday itself, which is not the case
Yeah.
for hotels, certainly not the case for Airbnbs.
Yeah. And that was a big calculation in the design of that property, is that it has to function as this, living museum to fans of the show, but that will not get you through a whole stay. It also has to be a comfortable, like,
Yes.
nice place to actually stay that you will have more fun out once the novelty of, oh, cool, this is the house featured in Stranger Things wears off, and you're still like, wow, this is like a really cool house that has, a record player and an old CRT TV and like old school video games that we could play and other things to do when that, novelty wears off.
Yeah, totally. I'd like to just pivot us a little bit. I'd love to get your take on what you think is the most common mistake that people make with content marketing. You've been in the game for a long time now, you've had lots of different experience in different areas. Does it strike you that there is sort of a one repeated kind of error or misstep that you see brands or people making? Or is there like a suite of a family of mistakes that you
A
see?
comedy of errors. Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say, like, throughout my career, one of the main takeaways I've learned is starting small and testing and using that to kind of dip your toe into things before projects get too
Yeah.
overblown. Sometimes there's like a assumption or a hypothesis that drives a large program, and it spins up this huge workflow, cross-functional workflow amongst other people, and you get kind of far down the road to where it's hard to pivot or steer the ship, and then you realize, oh, hey, that initial assumption or hypothesis that developed this was not exactly what I thought was going to be, and then it becomes a lot harder. So I now spend a lot more time kind of building, the skateboard version of things and testing it via like social or email, or great platforms where you can test bed really smaller snippets of messaging to see how those resonate in a, like an A/B test or something, and then bubble up those insights into larger content pieces that might be more involved or involve, outside agency partners or
Mm.
others. So that's one thing that I'll say. But to that point, I will also caution folks about being too myopically focused on the short-term metrics, because that is also something, like,
Amen.
as a content and brand marketer, like I said before, the worst thing you could do is have a short-term test go out and you say, okay, well, this conversion rate is slightly higher than that one, so this is the truth moving forward, without understanding some of the downstream effects that might happen that are inherently a lot harder to measure. In brand, like trust and the knowledge of a brand and your connection with your audience, those things are notoriously difficult to get a full picture of, versus your typical kind of 30 day last touch attribution window that you would see in growth marketing, that gives you a lot more confidence in those decisions that you make. So as a brand marketer especially, you want metrics to inform the work that you're doing, but you also want to have some art to the science where you're just like, no, this is just the right thing to do,
Mm.
and this will have long-term benefits. And you need to be able to bring along leadership along the way to have
Yes.
them trust the process as those metrics kind of become more evident over time.
Mm. What are your favorite metrics to use for doing data analysis and providing the kind of justification that leadership teams quite reasonably want to see sometimes, to do with, the investment going into things like brand marketing?
I mean, the closer you can embed yourself with the business intelligence, like the more you can understand the full funnel of your business, from the first touch, the first time somebody interacts with your brand, whether it be on social or
Mm.
in through organic search or any of the other kind of inroads they have, and understand how they evolve over time. And then ultimately, what kind of like dollars through whatever e-commerce or whatever platform you have, that's valuable to have. But for me, I also like to kind of like take a step back a little bit and take a view of just like, am I producing things that people are looking at and interacting with and engaging with? So bounce rate, or like time on site, or even just like sessions, or how content that we're producing is kind of being placed in search engine rankings. Those type
Mm.
of things are very important to me, because it gives me signal that there is some value and people are interacting with that content. And then what happens further down funnel, I don't want to get too in the weeds on, because it's hard to really suss out every single thing that happens
Yeah.
downstream. But if you can like at least concentrate on how folks are engaging, if they're engaging with you at all, that's a good place to at least give you some directionally accurate knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm conscious of the time, and I'd like to draw us to a close by asking you, Bret, what are you most excited about in your own personal universe, sort of towards the end of the year? What are you most excited about until we reach 2025?
We've recently, opened up new products. We've kind of like gotten into the real estate backed debt side of thing by launching a private credit fund. So as much as we're also kind of disrupting just general real estate investing, we're also looking for other avenues to really engage with investors and give them more opportunities to build a very diversified and functional portfolio of real estate assets in one place. Obviously, the launch of the buyer's house is going to be really huge, and I think a lot of folks are going to get some joy out of that place. So it'll be really fun to see that project come to fruition. So those are a couple of the big things for sure. But there's, working for like a nimble startup, as you do, like there's a lot of pivots and adversity along the way, and it keeps it interesting for sure.
That's a wonderful take on what can be a very, many vicissitudes in the startup world, lots of ups and downs. When people want to find out more about you or see how they could work with you or connect with you in any way, where are the best places to send people?
Folks can come to my website, bretneuman.com, bretneuman.com, or come interact with us on any of the Arrive channels. Come check out some of our content and see what we have going on over there.
Awesome. I will link to both of those places in the show notes directly below the podcast. It's been so nice to talk to you, Bret. Thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Catch you next time. That's it for this episode of Uncommon Knowledge. I hope you learned something new or got an unfamiliar way to look at a familiar problem. Until next time, I wish you all good things, and I'll catch you on the next episode.